Hey guys, and welcome to another episode in our digital classroom series, and today it's about a review. And you guys know I love experimenting with new software, right? Especially if it gives you something new or something that you can, well, use in your images to make them stand out a little bit more. Now, most of the software that you will find online, like for example presets or separate apps, are actually things that you can also do in a proper raw converter, for example Lightroom or Photoshop or Capture One or whatever you want to use, Luminar. There are so many out there. So when I do a review, I really want to do it from software that brings something new to the table. Now, there are a few things that I find really important in software. One, that's usability. But two, that's also, it has to be in one package or it has to be a plugin. So what is a plugin? A plugin is software that you use in Photoshop or Lightroom. So you use Photoshop or Lightroom as your main hub, and then you jump into the presets or into your software, whatever you want to use, and then you go back into Photoshop and do everything else. Now, if you use an app that's standalone, I really find it important that you can do more in the app than just what it's designed for. So today we're going to take a look at Anamorph. And Anamorph is an app that's sold by our friends from PhotoWow, and you can also get it directly from the website of the manufacturer, of course. And what it promises is a totally and enhanced way of looking at depth of field manipulation. Or in other words, changing the look of your image. So let's jump into Anamorph. Okay, so Anamorphic is really cool, and if you know Anamorphic, the term, it's actually used a lot in, for example, projectors by squeezing an image together. Now in this case, we are talking about changing the way that your focus works. Now, one of the things that I love to do in my photography is, of course, pinpoint my model or my subject. Now, when I'm shooting with medium format cameras, I actually have something called a tilt and shift lens. And what it does is it changes the whole look of the image. Now, normally it's used for converting verticals. For example, if you photograph a building and it's very tall and you're standing on the bottom, you aim your camera up and the converted verticals will do something like this. With a tilt and shift lens, you can actually make those verticals straight again. And that's very simple how they do it. This is your plane of focus. This is normally your lens, so it hits the sensor like this. By changing that angle, you also change, of course, your focus points because you change the distance. Now, the main thing when you do this in real life, and this is important, when you do it in real life, everything changes because you have a three-dimensional space. When you do something like this in software, you have a big problem because that's a two-dimensional space. So in a two-dimensional space, when you change something, it will change over the whole image because it doesn't recognize the model or the subject. And this is a big disadvantage of a lot of software because there's a lot of stuff going on in the back that's really important. For example, chromatic aberration, but also the way that your aperture blades work. So let's take a look at Anamorphic, how they solve something like this. Well, first of all, I'm gonna make a big and huge disclaimer. It still works on a two-dimensional image unless you load something like a depth map. The depth map is something that you can load and extract, for example, from your iPhone images and even from my Samsung. Now, I'm not gonna go into this because this is something that I literally never use, but if you wanna work with depth maps, they support it, and that's a big plus, of course. Okay, so let's see what I can do with it. This is one of the shots we took from Linda during a workshop. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place my center. Let's first find out what the center is, right? Now, we have the blur on 0, so let's just, and this is how I always do it, let's overdo this a lot. There we go. Okay, the first thing that you see is that the plus is the center. That's awesome because that makes operating software way easier if it's really there. It's the plus, right? But you also see this bulb, so let's see what that does. Okay, that narrows it, but you can also tilt it. See this? This is cool. Because now I could, for example, choose to have my whole model sharp. Now, this is what I call a simulation of a tilt and shift lens. You have something that's more vertical or horizontal, just depending on how you place it. Okay, so we're back on the face. So let's change the aperture bouquet shape. So we have a round with stuff in the middle. And we have this. Now, at the moment, you don't really see a difference, right? We can make it rounder. Open it up again, close it. And this is why I always use the blur on maximum, because now I I can literally just make it very small and I can literally see the differences. There we go. So this is something I always advise you guys to do. If you want to start out with something, just make it 100% blurred and then you can see what it does and you can start changing stuff around. We also have bouquet fringe. So we can literally just see the bouquet changing. And this is something that happens, of course, also in a normal lens. So it's really cool that the software also shows this. Very nice. But that's not all. I said this emulates more like the tilt and shift lens. So watch this. You can also do this, the radial focus. And now it gets more interesting, I think, to really pinpoint something towards a model or a subject. And here you have exactly the same options. So you can go for your fringe, for your bouquet fringe. And just change all these settings. And of course we have this one. Don't know how to call this one, but hey, we have different options, right? And that's where it's all about. There we go. Let's make that a little bit more towards the model. There we go, really nice. Now I have to be honest, while experimenting with Anamorphic, I really like the looks. The thing is, in the user interface, there are some things that can be a little bit tricky. I'm using a touchpad, for example, at the moment, and sometimes I can literally just change the size, and sometimes it just doesn't do what I want it to do. But hey, overall, when you use a tablet, that works way better. And this, of course, is the whole area. So most of the time I will use something like the round one, where you can literally just pinpoint everything nicely. You can even make it an oval. There we go. And as you can see, I'm stuck again. So I can set it up. And then sometimes it just doesn't work. When you use a drawing tablet, by the way, this is no problem at all. It's more like when you use a touchpad or your laptop. This can sometimes happen. And it's a little bit annoying. Okay, so this is one shot where I really want some separation with the backdrop. And then, for example, something like this will really work. I will never do it on this setting. I will probably go somewhere here. Now, of course, you can change your highlight settings and your lens distortion. But as you can see in this image, it doesn't really do anything. So let's open up another one. And now you can see a lot more. So let's open up. Don't save. Let's really draw some attention to something. Okay. Now, this was a shot I shot in, I believe it was New York. And what I liked about it was the arrow pointing towards the guy lying on the floor. But because I'm walking around, everything is sharp because I'm actually using a 24-70. I'm shot it probably on 5.6 or f8. So everything is sharp. And that's something in this image I don't want. Now, the cool thing is I don't need a depth map to do exactly what I want to do in this image. And that's actually make that guy stand out and that arrow. What I can do is very simple. Take the plus, put it on him. Make it a little bit smaller. There we go. Maybe angle it just a little bit for natural looking images. And just add a little bit of the blur. As you can see here, ooh, that looks really, really nasty. But as soon as you let go, you will see that it renders in the backdrop. So this looks really nasty. And then it renders. So what would be natural? Well, let me try something. So first of all, of course, I need it to be exactly on him. And because it's a plane, I mean, it's over the whole area, I can make that plus go a little bit bigger that way. There we go. Okay, now let's start adding a little bit of blur. There we go. Maybe even make it more narrow to him. There we go. I really like this. But I don't really like that backdrop. I think it's too crowded one way. So let's just change this. Makes it a little bit worse, but when I change my highlights, now this is where the trick comes in, and I really like this in this software. You see this? So if you want it more obvious, you actually turn on those highlights, right? And really make it jump out. In this case, I really want to tone it down. And this is something that you can't do with a normal lens on location. You can, of course, later in Photoshop, draw a vignette around your model, make it darker. But I think it's really cool with the software that you can have that control over your highlights. Lens distortion. In this image, you see it much better. Do you see that? You really see it in the lens posts, but also in the signs. And then when I let go, it renders. Looks really, really convincing. There we go. Now change it between the open one, the shape of the bouquet with the autofocus spots, and you can see the difference. When I now change the highlights, it's way more aggressive. So when I go to this one, and these are the subtle changes that can really make a huge difference in what you like in an image. And the options they give you is, you can change whatever you want. This is really something that I highly recommend in software. Make sure that you're not locked into one look. There has to be different stuff. And of course, the cool thing is you have to adjust it yourself. For example, if I don't like this, I can of course choose for a more circular one. Place this on my subject. Make it a little bit smaller. And there we go, gives it a totally different look. In this case, I would probably add a little bit less blur to keep it believable. And in my opinion, this just works. You can even make it a little bit more like an oval and get that whole border in. And maybe just add a little bit to his feet. There you go. It's just looking what you like. I think this, the feet are a little bit out of focus. Make it a little, there we go. So it's very, very sensitive. Whatever you do, you can literally just change small things. Okay, same here. You can change your bouquet size. Now, in all honesty, in this shot, you can see it changing in the back, of course. But this is more the subtle stuff. Same with your chromatic aberration. It's nice that it's there and you can really fine-tune your images, but it's mostly about that focus. Now, I told you at the start of the video that I really like software that gives you just something else, because this is a standalone app. So that means that I open up my images in here, I change my attention to focus, and then I save it. But I still have that same image from my camera. And what is the thing that we love to do in post-processing? Right, we love to give a certain mood to our images. We want to make sure that people look at our images and go like, "Ooh, that looks really nice." And I think Instagram was one of the first instances where that really took a big jump, because they have these filters built in. And I know at the start, a lot of photographers actually used the Instagram app, not for Instagram, but for the looks they got from the Instagram app. And I think this is also one of the points where, for example, those small apps on your phone became incredibly popular because they gave you film looks. Now, for a one-step solution where you only can do this focus, I would never review this software, for the very simple reason it's nice. It does a very good job, especially with fine-tuning that chromatic aberration, fine-tuning your bouquet, which in these images you can see it's subtle changes, but it can be the changes that go from unbelievable to, well, maybe it was shot with a lens like this. So what is that extra stuff? Do you see this in the bottom? That's actually where I wanted to show you guys. This is the original, but they also have a lot of different looks. And those looks are pretty cool. Now, I have to be honest, I would love, for example, sliders that you can also change this look, right? Well, yeah, look on the side, right? Look here. There you go. Brightness, exposure, saturation. But of course also your clarity in your focus area. And this is something that's really nice. And your clarity in the blur. So we have it in the focus area and in the blur. Look at this. So we can do it separate. And we have film grain, if you really need it. And of course you can change your filter intensity. So go to original, add a little bit, or add everything. Combined with this, you have a very powerful standalone solution. So let's just open up another image and let's just see what we can do with that one. And let's take this one. This is something that I love to do when I'm in the States, finding these kinds of things. I just love this. And we don't see this a lot in Europe. So let's change this to here, over our big boy. And here you see that same graphic interface problem where I can't change the size anymore. Again, with a tablet I don't have this problem. It's only when I'm using a touchpad, but it is a little bit annoying. And I immediately have to say something, by the way. This will be solved for the very simple reason. When I started this review, the software wasn't really working on my M1 Pro MacBook. It jumped around and images got distorted and squeezed. Initially, we just emailed the guy that wrote the software, and he was very quick to help us out. And within a day, we had a software version where that didn't happen. So that was great. So I started experimenting a little bit, and I found out that when we exported images, they were limited to about 5,000 pixels. Well, I'm shooting with a 60 megapixel camera, so that doesn't really do anything for me. But we emailed the guy, and a day later he said, well, we fixed that. You can now export at 8,000 by 8,000. It's still not 60 megapixels. It just shows you guys that when you email the builder, that he will actually respond and change the software if there's a bug. So I'm pretty sure when I email him this is something that I find out now because all the tests I did with the tablet, and I'm now actually doing it with the touchpad. And I don't want to change the review for this because you are going to use it maybe on a laptop or as standalone, and often with a mouse. So this is something that you have to be aware of, but I'm pretty sure he's going to solve it very quickly. Okay, so let's change this to an oval size. Let me see what I like better. Do I like the oval size or do I like this? And in all honesty, I think I'm gonna like the vertical one better. And by the way, a very simple solution for that whole problem with resizing is just go here, go for the round one, go back to this one. And the first time it always works. So if you want it narrow, you just make it narrow now and you place it over. It's something you can work around with. That's why I do the review now, and I'm not going to wait for an update, but I'm pretty sure when I tell him this, he will solve it within a few days. Okay, the blur. Let's first do it over the top again. There we go. Change the bouquet, and in this image you can see it a lot better what's going on with the bouquet. It does need to render a little bit. There we go. So it makes the bouquet a little bit more harsher when you use the open setting. Let's see if the same thing happens for the round one. Let's do it a little bit less. There we go. Yeah, it makes it harsher. And this is nicer and soft. Okay, but I like the vertical one. Okay, let's add a little bit less. Now, the thing with this is don't overdo it. If you overdo it, it really looks fake as can be. But if you do it very, very subtle, it can really give you a lot of difference. Look at this, the original or this one. And it already gives you a nice glow in your image. And that's what I love about out of focus areas. And that's why I love working on the streets with shallow depth of field. But sometimes, like in the previous shot, you're walking around, you have your camera set up on 5.6 or f8, and you don't have the time to change it all the time. And then you end up with images with a lot of depth of field where you would prefer to be shallower. And in that case, I don't really mind using software to just fake it. Okay, same here with my bouquet. Let's do it over the top. And then you can see what the bouquet does. As you can see, it changes the image dramatically. But again, this is over the top, and you can also just leave it out. In this case, let's leave it out. Okay. Let's add a little bit of blur. Okay, in this case, I want a little bit more in the highlights, I think. Or, yeah, I like that to glow a little bit. There we go. And I love the saturation in this shot. Yeah, clarity I will put on 0. I don't really like that here. Now, this is the original one. Let's give it some looks. I'm just going to go through the looks they deliver. And again, you can fine-tune those looks on the side by just changing your saturation or your exposure or brightness. I would have loved to also have a contrast there, by the way. Or maybe shadows and highlight. That would be awesome. Overall, I think this does a really nice job. And they also have some really nice black and whites. Okay, so for who is this software and what do I think about the software? This was one of the reviews that I had a lot of fun with for the very simple reason. The idea is very simple. You put stuff out of focus and you draw the attention towards the subject that you want in focus. You can find this in almost any RAW converter, including Photoshop, Capture One, and well, just name them. The thing is, however, not a lot of people want to work with Photoshop or want to work with Lightroom because it's too complicated. And of course, we as pros go like, Lightroom complicated, Photoshop complicated. Come on, it's easy. But you have to remember the first time you opened up Photoshop. I still remember the first time that I opened up Photoshop. I looked at all those menus and all those options. And I was going like, yeah, forget about it. Just close it down. And I literally started learning Photoshop by using it in my workflow. That's also why I always make the joke, I'm the best Photoshopper in the world. I can tell you everything about Photoshop within my workflow, which is about 0.01% of what Photoshop is capable of. So for a lot of people, Photoshop is very, very scary. And for those people, they still want to have those looks in their images, and they still want to have something that's really simple for a budget, right? And PhotoWow always has great offers with cheap software that literally works like a charm. In this case, I think they hit the nail on the head. They deliver everything in one package. So the focus part, that's where it's really aimed up, is really extensive. You can do your chromatic aberration, you can do the change of your bouquet, you can do the blur, you have several options for a tilt and shift effect or really focusing down on your model. You can use depth maps, so it's really complete. But at that point, they also add that little bit of extra, that tinting. And if it would be only that tinting, I would still be a little bit reluctant to do a review about the software. But it's that part where you can literally say your filter intensity or your clarity for the focus areas or the autofocus areas. And this is so important in a standalone plugin, because in Photoshop or even in Lightroom nowadays, or Capture One, you can create several areas in your image. For example, if you want clarity in your image, it will go into your whole image with most standalone plugins. In Photoshop, Capture One, or Lightroom, you can literally mask that out. So I think if you use a standalone plugin, it's incredibly important that you have that options separate. Anamorphic, for me, it's really, really nice in its focus effects. The extra effects, I think they did it really well if I go for the original image. They have some really cool black and white versions, which I think go from contrasty enough like this one to really nice and flat. And they have some really nice vintage looks and some really nice warm tones. So overall, I think they did a pretty good job. Could they improve it? Yes, of course. At this moment, the software is limited to 8000 by 8000 pixels. I think on an iPad that's understandable, although now with the M1 iPads, it's also... I highly recommend putting no limits on the software. In other words, if you put in a 100 megapixel file, just export it in 100 megapixel files. And if your computer can't handle it, well, maybe it's time to upgrade, right? Or give an option like, okay, your computer is not fast enough, let's scale down the images. But I think it's wrong to have software where you can only export at a limited resolution. But again, he solves it really fast, and I think that within a few weeks we will see a version where there's no limitations on the desktop. The other thing is the graphic interface. As it looks now, it works really well, but on a touchpad it can be a little bit flaky by resizing your focus area. A simple workaround is by going into the other one. So just click here, go back, and you're at your starting point, and you can literally just manipulate whatever you want. But as soon as I click, oh, now it does work. Let's see what happens when I use the plus and click again. There we go. So as soon as I change my position, oh, now it does work. This is a little bit flaky, but this is something that he will probably work out within a few weeks, but I have to mention it in the review. So overall, I highly recommend this software for people that don't use Photoshop or Lightroom. They want something really simple on the desktop, just throw in some images and just export them in social media size. Although 8000 by 8000 isn't really social media size, it's a lot bigger, but you know what I mean, right? And I think that's also where the software is aimed for, because as soon as I do export, you will see save, mail, airdrop messages, save to photos. So a really, really simple interface. So save, and this is something that my parents actually would figure out in a few seconds. And this is also where I get a little bit of that extra feeling like, oh, I would love to add a little bit more here. You can save as PNG, great, of course. You can save as TIFF, awesome. Or you can save as JPEG, and that's it. I would be very happy if I would have an option for JPEG, for example, 12, 10, 8, 7, or highest compression, lowest compression, medium compression, and something in between. So I would love to see a little bit more there. But overall, I think for the target market, this is an awesome app where everybody can play around with focus, give your images an extra look, and just throw in something, and 10 seconds later have something for social media that will wow your followers, and it will go like, wow man, you really know how to operate a camera. Because of the depth of field, right? Okay, so thank you so very much for watching. I will leave the links below for Photo Wow, where you can get this software. And again, one of the things that's really important for me is how does the builder respond? I've done reviews for software which I really liked, but there were 1 or 2 points where I went like, oh, this can be improved. You email the builder and you never get an answer back. And that means that I don't do the review, or I do a really bad review. And I don't think people want to see a bad review, so I just skip that review. In this case, the builder responds really, really fast. So all the things that I address, he will see the video and he will probably add it to the software. So check it out on Photo Wow. I will leave the links below, and I'm pretty sure you're actually gonna love this. I do want to add one more note. He also has some apps on the iPad, like for example reflections and sky replacements, and putting people into spaces, and of course putting animals and other subjects into spaces. Now all those apps are not really something that I do, but the reflection app is actually something I'm looking at the moment, and maybe we're going to do a review for that too. So, but you're going to see that the next time. Thank you so very much for watching, guys, and see you again next time. Bye bye.